Welcome into the best in true crime talk radio. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. We have an exciting show, folks. Today, I tell you, it's a follow-up to a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about bullying. We were talking about bullying in schools. I want to reverse this a little bit, though. It seems like we have no punitive... Well, we have no punishment. Put it that way. We have no punishment when it comes to what happens to bullies, to parents when things go awry. I tell you, Dave was bullied as a child. I was bullied as a child. I've never told my bullying story on air, and you know what? I'm going to save it for our guest. Our guest today, Mark Simon, was. He has a horrifying bullying story that we're going to tell, but he also was the first to use a law to come back at the parents, and this is going to sound familiar because it's going on right now in the news, to come back at the parents of the bully. The reason I say it sounds familiar is because right now that the school shooter in Michigan has had charges brought up against the parents for getting him the gun. Voluntary manslaughter charges, as a matter of fact, for getting him the gun that he used in that school shooting. And you know what? There's not, and this is just my opinion, and take it as you will. It's just my opinion. I'm not crying for him. I'm not crying for the parents. I'm just not. I think there ought to be a few more punitive damages and punitive charges brought up for parents that enable bullies. I think in order to stop a bully, it ought to be stopped right away at home. And we do need to take a little more charge of our children. And if you're not familiar, I'll just give you a brief overview. As I said, we want to get to our guest, Mark Simon, here. It was an early Christmas gift from his parents, this 9mm Sig Sauer handgun. Ethan Crumbleys, 15 years old, called it my new beauty. It was the day after Thanksgiving. He and his father had gone together to a Michigan gun shop to buy it. He and his mother spent a day testing out the gun, so they enabled it. It was stored unlocked in his parents' bedroom. And then when a teacher reported seeing their son searching online for ammunition, that's right, the teacher saw him searching online for ammunition, the mother wasn't alarmed. In fact, Jennifer Crumbleys texted her son, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." Those were her words. A day later, the authorities say the teenager fatally shot 4 classmates in the halls of Oxford High School in suburban Detroit using that handgun that his parents had bought for him. Now, I'm not a gun control nut either. I used to hunt. Emphasis on used to. I can't get out in the woods anymore. I believe in gun safety. I believe in guns being used responsibly. This isn't a case of a gun being used responsibly. This is a case of a kid who made drawings. This is a case of a kid who obviously wasn't using a handgun for something responsibly, and a kid who needed help. His parents didn't do the right thing. I want to now talk about my guest, who I got to say, this is well beyond anything that I suffered when I was bullied, although I was damn near bludgeoned to death. But back in 1980, Mark Simon grew up in Houston, Texas. He was bullied in high school, and we'll get to his story. I don't want to tell his entire story here for you now, but his story is just plain unnerving. But we're going to find out what exactly Mark did to bring in this bully's parents and used a law to try to get some sort of justice. Let's bring in now our guest, who has a book out there called Attacked, Bullied, Surviving Terror and Finding Justice. And I'll tell you right now, if there's any parent that's listening to this program whose child is being bullied right now, you need to get a copy of this book. MarkSimonBooks.com is the address, the URL you need to go to during this program and get a copy of this book. And we have got it, the URL in the description of this program. Mark Simon, welcome into True Crime Tuesday. Thank you very much, my friend, for joining us. You know, bullying is a huge thing for Dave and I in this program. And I want to thank you not only for first of all, not only for surviving your ordeal, but for, everything that you're doing to help teens and kids and families try to figure out what they can do to try to get some justice on their end.
I've gotten really amazing responses from readers that they had been bullied. And some of them, people have been bullied by the same people who were attacking me, but had never spoken about it. So it gave them a catharsis to find out my story. Because even people I went to school with, this was in 80, there was no such thing as social media. Very few people really knew what happened. So, I did what I could with other people who I knew were being bullied and attacked, but, I only knew a small portion of them. So those who came out, it was really gratifying to hear their story and have them admit that, it was the first time they've ever talked about it and that they finally felt better that something actually happened to these guys.
Yeah, let's take it back to the beginning, and then I want to kind of get to that point where we start to get into your story, Mark. I have a point, and if I can, I've never told this story before. I want to tell you my story real quick and relate to you. When I was so young at the time, I want to say I was about 10 years old. I was kind of an awkward kid. I didn't talk much at that time. I was a shy kid. And I would walk from my house to the elementary school, which was just blocks away. It was, in my mind, it felt like it was six blocks to a mile away. And really, when you walk it was maybe 3 blocks, if that. It wasn't very far at all. There's a little trail that went in back of our house, past a few other houses, and I walked that trail along the boulevard. It was a little dirt trail. And there's a kid who lived kind of, I don't want to say kitty corner from us, but he was a few houses up on the next block. He was probably not even a block and a half away from where we lived. And he was advanced in age. He was probably 2 grades ahead of me. And I didn't really know him all that well. He didn't really know us as kids that well. There was a whole group of kids, and we were all about the same age, and we hung out, and we played boot hockey out in the circle in the winter, and we played football in the fall, and we all kind of got along, and we all played organized sports together too. So we all as kids had kind of a good time, and our parents got together and they had cookouts and they did neighborhood activities. So everybody kind of knew each other. So I think he had, if I remember right, he had a single mom and a dad who wasn't really around type situation. So he was his family was kind of the odd family out, but everybody kind of knew the situation. They did talk to his mom, but he was a very mean, isolated kid. And we didn't really talk to him because of that. Because we knew if we talked to him, he wouldn't stay nice for very long. He would try to figure out a way to get violent. And especially when we were walking home, we didn't try to run into him. I'll call him Bobby to protect his identity. So when we would try to avoid Bobby, we try to walk on the other side of the boulevard to avoid him, or try to run from one side to the other. And generally most days we could do it. This day in question, I screwed up. I ended up on the same side of the boulevard as Bobby, and I thought I could get away from him, and I couldn't. I was wrestling with my backpack at the time. And I slipped up, and he ended up making me think that he was going to go to the other side of the boulevard to go to his house. Then he came back over to my side of the boulevard, and he hid behind a bush for a bit. And he waited for me to think I was safe when I cut across between the neighbor's yard and my yard. And he cornered me at my door. We had a screen door and a big metal. It was like a wooden facade door, but it was a big metal door. And I remember he grabbed me by like the back of my collar and then my shoulders and flipped me around and grabbed me like pie-faced. And then by my hair and kept ramming the back of my head into the door. And like I started to lose consciousness, like the lights were going out, you know? And the last thing I saw was my friend Jason with a baseball bat. And he took a swing and hit him in the back of the head, hit Bobby in the back of the head. That's the last thing I remember. The last thing I remember is coming to, and Jason and his dad standing there, and Bobby laying there in a heap. That was it. And I didn't have really any memories of what happened after that. That was the most justice I got.
Well, and even that kind of justice can feel really good. But I'm going to correct one thing that you said in your story.
Okay.
You said you screwed up because you didn't cross the road. You didn't screw up. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't ask to be bullied. The bully did everything wrong. You are a victim. You are not to blame in any way for being in that position. You deserve to be there as much as he did. And that's something that I just want to make sure that all your listeners pay attention to, because there's a lot of victim blaming, even in our own talk, but in the press. You know, people will talk about a woman who had been raped, and they talk about the woman who had been raped and what she was wearing, having nothing to do with the fact that this guy raped the woman. He's at fault. Let's talk about the person who's actually at fault. So you didn't do anything wrong.
I know with Bobby, it took a few more times of him abusing kids before he finally did something that triggered him to go to juvie. I mean, it wasn't even that incident, because he came to and then I think he just ran home. It was just one of those things of kids being kids, you know, and this was right around that time, 1980. That's why when I read over your story and your details, it sends that chill down my spine, 1980. And I think about what you've gone through, and I think, wow, that's amazing that you got as much done as you did, because it took a lot to put Bobby away. Because it seems to me that authorities just didn't listen then. It wasn't one of those things where, you know, they thought, well, it's just a bad seed. You know, the parents will take care of it. That the parents will straighten the kid out. That was always the expectation. The kid will be straightened out by the parent. So tell me, before you were the bullying began, tell me a little bit about Mark. What kind of kid was Mark?
My life growing up was quite a bit different than a lot of people, because my father owned a construction company. We built custom homes in Northwest Houston, and I was working full time from the point I was 13 on. Mm-hmm. So even when I was 14, I got an early driver's license, and I was driving to job sites, and I was running the job sites by the time I was 14 and 15. So when I was 16, which is when I was 16 when this whole attack happened, I was running my dad's business. I was an honor student. When I was saying running his business, I was a superintendent, so I ran the job sites. And so I was always telling all the crews, you know, these large construction guys who are 3-4 times my age, what to do, because I knew every step of how to build a house. But I was very short. I was, at that time when I was 16, I was probably 5'3", maybe 5'4", very thin, but very muscular. Back then, you know, the kind of clothing we wore, you couldn't necessarily tell that I was muscular. And the only reason I bring that up is it's one of the reasons I didn't really get hurt is because I was stronger than a lot of the guys who came after me. But I was so small that made me a target. I had a lot. My family had money, so that also made me a target. But the biggest reason that the guys came after me was because I had a big mouth. I had a lot of success early on. I was also a competitive skateboarder when I was 12. I had my own line of skateboards with Schwinn, boards that I actually designed and built with my own hands, and then Schwinn distributed them.
Okay.
So, it's kind of heady shit for a kid, 12, 13 years old. And then running crews, where I'm telling guys who, 350 pounds of solid muscle what to do, it made me very hard to intimidate. So these guys that ran around, I call them a gang for lack of a better term. They weren't like the Crips or the Bloods type of thing, but they were a gang that intimidated people all over our area, not just in school. And, they would do things like, when everyone was playing basketball fights or push people out of the way, or they would make threats, or they broke one kid's thighs when he saw them spray painting the school. They literally jumped on his femur and snapped his femur. So they threw. Or it was rumored. I never saw it, but it was rumored they were the guys that were throwing cinder blocks off of bridges onto the freeway. So these were not good guys. Mm-hmm. And when they would tease me, or in gym class they would try to push me around. I would push them back harder and would turn my back, and they just couldn't intimidate me, which embarrassed them in front of their friends. So every time they wanted revenge, even though they started it. But nothing they did could get to me. So that's why I kind of preface my background a little bit, because it put me in a place that most people aren't at that age. Successful in business and really strong, yet short. So I was a target, but I was a target who could stand up for myself. And because of my big mouth, because I absolutely had a smart mouth. I was a 16-year-old kid, right?
Yep.
And we were at the week before the big attack. We were all at this big party. It was a big bonfire out in its unfinished subdivision. It was hidden from the authorities. It was trees all around. And one of the guys, this guy Perry, one of the two ringleaders, was running by, just aggravated about something. And I said, "Yeah, no one cares, Perry." Right? Just a smart ass comment as he's walking by. Mm-hmm. Well, that made him mad, and he came back, looked me in the face, and then punched me straight in my face. But I just stood there and looked at him. I went, "Perry, you're still not worth it," because it didn't move me. And because I've been hit in the head by lumber, I don't know how many times, so a fist wasn't going to do a whole lot. And it shocked him, and his friends grabbed him and drug him off, and that embarrassed him. And that set it up for the following week when they got 30 people to attack me. So
let me ask you this. You always hear the saying, well, if you just stand up to a bully, if you just stand up to them, they'll stop. That doesn't seem like that was the case here.
Well, and that usually isn't the case. I mean, there's different types of bullying. There are some bullies, you punch them once in the face and they realize, oh, I can't do anything here, and they back down. That happened with my kids. Mm-hmm. With these guys, and a lot of people who are just truly bad people, two things will happen. If they bully you and get away with it, you're an easy target. They keep coming after you. If they bully you and you get the best of them, they want revenge and they come back even stronger. There is no winning situation with people whose mindsets are so messed up and just frankly evil. Because these guys, and they were, look, and the ringleaders, they were totally messed up on drugs. It was obvious. We all knew in the school. I knew these guys for years. It's not like I didn't know them. We weren't friends ever, but I knew them.
Yeah.
And And it's not like this wasn't a poor area. This is a well-to-do area. And it was the largest high school in Texas at the time. This is Klein Forest High School in the Champions area of Houston. So, there's 4,000 kids. There's a lot of people there. So they had a lot of people that they had the opportunity to intimidate.
Okay, so if it's obvious these guys aren't quite giving up as of yet. So it's before the big incident. You tell Perry basically, you can't punch. You're right before the incident, the big incident. What did they give you any clues that this was ramping up? Did they start saying stuff in school, or what happened that lets you know that this was escalating?
I didn't know it was escalating until my car was surrounded and covered by 30 people with weapons. I didn't know. I had no idea. I had my own life going on. I was an artist. Most people, it's not that I was in the popular crew of people. I was one of the one of the smart kids, one of the nerds. Mm-hmm. But I was also the artist of the school, so everyone knew me because I drew for the school paper. My artwork was all over the place. I was in the paper for my art and that kind of stuff. So most people knew me as the artist of the school. So I had my own thing going on, and every weekend we all went out and we partied. I worked all during the week, so that weekends were a time I would blow off some steam like everyone else.
Yeah.
So when that big attack happened, that was totally a surprise.
So nobody who was maybe tapped into these guys even gave you a warning?
Nope, not at all.
Oh my God. All right, so let's go to the scenario of this big event. So you show up to This is a bonfire party, correct?
Yeah, it was just this informal thing that because it was an unfinished subdivision, there was a cul-de-sac, an unfinished road that just had a circle at the end. And it was in the middle of this big forest that we would just grab tree trunks and large branches, and I guess some people would bring old furniture, whatever they could find, and just throw it in. And around the bonfire, everyone would drink and smoke and party and hook up, and and it was not just our schools; a few schools we would get together, and cars would line both sides of the road, and guys would be jumping through the flames, trying to show off for the girls. And, it was classic teenage hangout, people getting drunk, people throwing up all over each other, people partying, loud music. It was a 1980 teenage hangout.
Now, did you go to this party with anybody?
I had a good friend of mine who lived just a couple houses away from me, Paul Lipinski. He and I had... the first time I was punched, we were in his little car, and then the next week when the big attack happened, he and I were in my car, and I had a car that everybody knew. It was very particular. It was a car I had rebuilt from the ground up. It was a 1963 Thunderbird with electric windows, jacked up back end, fancy wheels on it. It was super powerful stereo. So it was the kind of vehicle that you can't really miss. There weren't any other antiques like that were driving to high school. Okay. So it was easy to find me. Very easy. Because if you saw that car, there's Simon.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's a nice car.
So, yeah, it was great. And little did I know how helpful it would be that having electric windows and the window switches were actually on the center console. They weren't on the door like they are on cars now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that night, he and I drove in, and there was only one exit out of this, which is very important. One exit out. So you drive in from the main road. It was Stubner Airline at the time. They've renamed it since. And then at the first cross section, you take a left into the cul-de-sac. So we drive in, and it's totally packed. The bonfire is roaring. We drove slowly down one way, just kind of checking out who was there. Turned around in the cul-de-sac in front of the fire and pulled back right in the middle of all the cars and stopped. And we're just sitting in the car talking to a couple girls and a couple friends. And all of a sudden, all I hear is, "There's Simon. Hey, there's Simon. Let's rumble." And next thing I know, My car is covered with people.
Whoa.
Guys, all guys, jumping on the hood, coming up at me, jumping up on the roof, punching my buddy through the side window, punching me through my driver's side window, climbing up on the back. They've got bats and chains and burning boards out of the bonfire. And luckily the car is like a tank.
Mm-hmm.
But, as I was there and I saw this one guy rearing up about to smash my windshield. He was standing on my hood, taking a bat and just about to swing. And I look at my buddy. I said, lean over, roll up your window. So he was able to lean away from the door to the center console and hit the electric window, and it rolled right up. I did the same thing, and it was Perry who was punching me through my window, except I grabbed Perry's arm, and I rolled up the window on his arm, and I trapped him. And then I put the car in gear, and I floored it right before the guy swung down at my windshield. So he went rolling. Everyone went rolling off my car, except for Perry. I drug him down the road. Now, everyone else in the party has no idea what's going on. They think that I'm the ass, right? Because I'm driving super fast through this narrow area. I'm going over people's feet. They're throwing beer bottles and stuff at my car because it looks like I'm the one who's lost my mind.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Understandable. I get that. I don't blame any of those people for any of that.
Yeah.
And one of their friends, I don't remember his name anymore. He was just a big thug of a guy who had been held back one year. Jumps out in front of my car to try to make me stop.
Oh.
So I ran over him on purpose. And he went flying up over the hood of my car, smashed into my windshield, hit Perry on the side and drug them both off, and they rolled into a car on the side. And as I was frantically driving, trying to save us, I missed the exit.
Oh, no.
So I did a bat turn. I slammed on the brakes, spun the wheel, did a bat turn. We look up and silhouetted in front of that big bonfire. Mm-hmm. And this is literally the opening chapter of my book. I started with the action sequence. It looked like I was the Frankenstein monster and the villagers were coming after me. Because, all the pickup trucks and everything, everyone carried bats and pipes and stuff like that. It was Texas in the 80s. And so they pull flaming boards out, and these 30 guys come marching towards me, and they block off the exit. And all I see is this silhouette of this angry village coming to kill me.
Jeez.
And my friend is freaking out. Paul is just freaking out next to me. I'm sweating like crazy. You get that white chill and flop sweat.
Yeah.
Right? I'm hyperventilating. What the hell is going on? And as they start getting closer and we see we can't drive out, Harry had pulled his station wagon across the exit. I told my buddy, I said, hang on. I put it in the low gear, hopped the curb, and I drove across the rough ground. But between me and the road was a ditch, those gullies that go on left and right side of roads.
Yep. But
luckily, they had just dug it out again. After it sloughs down, they come through with a backhoe and they dig it out. And so there was a mound of dirt on my side of it. And my old 63 hit that mound of dirt. It launched my car up in the air and over that ditch, and I landed in the middle of a busy street. Thank God, not hitting any other cars.
Oh, wow.
I spun out and drove off and got away from everybody. Luckily, it was a pretty fast car, too, because I had done so much work on it. But, we got away from everybody. So we're freaking out and driving around, and there was a McDonald's that we all hung out at there on 1960. And we always knew that there was a cop there. His name is Officer Ogden. And Officer Ogden was about 350 pounds of everyone's best friend. He knew he also did some side work doing security at our school. Mm-hmm. So we all knew him. And he would hang out and at McDonald's on the weekends, and we would all just hang out with him and talk. He was a great guy. So we drove around for a while, and we thought, well, let's go talk to Ogden. He'll know what to do. So we drive in, he's sitting there, and he looks at me, he goes, Mark, I don't know what the hell has happened, but these guys are after you tonight. They already came in looking for you. You need to go home and just let things cool off. And I said, okay. And so I dropped Paul off at his house and I drove in. And my parents' house was on a corner. And, the front door was on one street, but we usually entered from the side street where the driveway was.
Can I stop you for a second, Mark?
Yeah.
So the best that Officer Ogden had for you was you just need to go home? He couldn't.
Yeah, don't get caught out there with everyone. Go home.
That was it? Not.
He didn't know what had happened. All he knew is that these guys were angry and they were after me. No one knew what was actually going on yet. So there was no reason for him to think anything else other than he knew these were bad guys. But, he just said, you don't want to get caught out here. Go home and be safe.
Okay. Continue. I'm sorry. That just blows me away. I understand because I ran into some of that same stuff myself, but continue. I'm flabbergasted, but continue.
Well, I actually agree with what he said. With what he knew at the time, no reason to think anything else. At the same point, he's the one who guided me through everything I ended up doing. Okay. So he is one of the heroes of the story.
Okay.
So, and the reason I'm talking about going home is that the attack continued.
Okay.
So I go in the side door to talk to my parents, and I talked to them every night when I came home anyway.
Yep.
But I was kind of breathless, and I just started trying to tell them what was going on, and we hear someone at the front door. And at this point, they still don't know I had been attacked because I literally had just walked in. So my mom, who was all of 5'2" and 95 pounds, in her robe, goes out the side door to look around, and one of the guys corners her. It says, "This Mark Simon's house." And she lies, said, "No, why are you here at my house?" And he goes, "This is Mark's house." At that point, I run in and went, "Dad, the surrounding mom." And he didn't need to hear anything else. Now, my dad's an old farm boy from Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Not real tall. He's 5'9", but he was solid muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Big barrel chest. Worked construction with me. And had a flash temper. He runs out. And again, neither of them have any idea what I had just been through. He just knows that someone is threatening his wife. So he goes out there. There are 4 guys in our yard, the 2 ringleaders and 2 other guys. And there's a pickup truck parked there in front of the house. And they say, "Hey, there's the old man. Let's go." So they hop in the truck, and the truck starts taking off. My dad is barefoot, runs after the truck and grabs Steve, one of the 2 ringleaders. Steve is the good-looking blonde who got away with everything because he was handsome.
Okay.
Grab Steve under the arm and the fleshy, tender part under your bicep and lifts him out with one arm.
Ooh.
Lifts him out of the truck, puts him down. So what the hell is going on here? The truck stops, backs up. Everyone gets out of the truck. Dad has got a grip on Steve. And Steve goes nuts, screaming and cursing and threatening and punching him, spitting on him, just screaming in his face and kicking him everything he can. And my dad has no idea what's going on. And they're out in the middle of the road. So Dad knows they're underage. And he's not actually on our property. Not realizing, we found out later, you can protect yourself. Doesn't matter where you are.
Okay.
And 2 of them surround my mom and throw her up against a tree and start slapping her around.
Oh.
And another guy comes up to me and starts, and to be honest, I don't remember what he did to me. I just know I was up against a tree, freaking out, looking at what's going on to my parents. I have no idea what was happening to me. And so this is going on. And to hear my dad talk about it, in fact, I've got an interview with my dad on my website about it, where he talks about, the insanity that was happening. He said, obviously, Steve was strung out on some sort of speed or coke or something, because he's never seen anyone speak so fast and curse so much and be so threatening so quickly. Until a neighbor comes out, and the neighbor's girlfriend yells out, "I just called the cops. They're on their way." And my neighbor comes out with a 4-foot pipe.
Wow.
The guy is about 22, Kyle, and the guys threatened Kyle, even though he's the one with the pipe. Luckily, none of these guys brought weapons to my house. But they were screaming at both my parents, "We're going to kill Mark. We're going to burn him. We're going to slice him into pieces and send him back in a bag to you."
Jeez.
You know, all this kind of stuff. And so Kyle says, "I'd just as soon beat your head the fuck in than look at you." So they hop in the truck, yelling curses at us, and leave. And a minute later, the cops show up. So we're all shaken. I finally get a chance to tell my parents what had happened. And my mom, who was afraid of everything anyway, is just a shaken mess. My dad is steaming, just steaming, because he wanted to pound Steve so badly, but he was afraid. He was afraid to do it.
I don't blame him.
And I'm just shaking. So that's what started the whole thing. So we ended up calling Officer Ogden. He came over to the house the next morning, filled him in on what was going on. He's the one who told us about this new law. This was a brand new law, had never been used, holding parents responsible for the actions of their kids, much like what's happening right now in Michigan with the Crumbly family.
Okay.
In my case, because it was a new law, it had just been enacted, it was actually a civil law, whereas what the parents in the Crumbly case are facing involuntary manslaughter charges. So that was criminal law. Mine was civil, but it was the start. And he said, "Look, the judge, and this was the largest independent court in the state of Texas in Harris County. He said the judge knows these guys, knows these kids, but the juvenile system is slow, and we're having a hard time doing anything that matters. You might want to think about this, but there's a process you have to go through. The process is we have to bring the parents into court for a formal warning to give them the opportunity to correct their kids' actions." And this is really relevant to what's going on with the Crumbly case. On forewarning that they knew of what was going on with their kid so they could have the opportunity to correct it and stop what eventually became, his murdering 4 people and injuring 7 others. So when we sat and talked to the judge, he filled us in on all the other details, and he agreed to meet with us on a Sunday.
Wow.
Because he understood, like everyone involved understood how dangerous this was.
Yeah.
At the same time, we hired a private security firm to watch our house because we were getting notes and threatening phone calls that they were going to firebomb our house. So there was a lot going on in just a quick couple days.
So let me ask you this, Mark. You're still getting notes, and I mean, obviously they're not signing it from the guys who came over in the truck the other night. I mean, they're not making it obvious it's them. But is that evidence still compiling on the case? I mean, or are they just
not that I do. There are certain things I don't remember.
Okay.
And I don't remember what happened to those things. I know that my mom found one of those notes that we're going to kill your son, cut him into pieces, and send him home in bags. I know my mom had gotten that note. She wrote it in her diaries. One of the things that the judge told us to do was to keep diaries that could be admissible into court, so we wouldn't have to try to remember things.
Okay.
And portions of all of our diaries are in my book as well. And it scans. I scanned the actual pages that we wrote in 1980 and put them in there. And I have some of the court documents in there too.
Okay.
In fact, one of the reviews of my book is from the original judge of my case, Judge McElroy.
Okay.
So anyway, I don't know on some of that. It calls from people I knew saying, "Look, we just heard this. Be careful." So it wasn't even direct phone calls. And of course, there was no such thing as the internet didn't even exist back then. So,
right.
It was literally just phone calls and generally it was phone calls and I would hear a parent in the background. "That's not that Simon boy you're talking to, are you?"
Oh.
No one wanted to associate with me. I became a pariah overnight.
Wow.
I mean, when I went to school that Monday morning, I was literally an island. 4,000 kids, no one would get within 10 feet of me. They would spread out. This wave would spread out around me like I was a great white shark.
My gosh.
And because they wouldn't talk to me. Their parents wouldn't let them hang out with me. I mean, that was it. Overnight, everyone knew there's a problem with Simon. We don't want to be involved.
Well, even just for the fact that you've got a target on your back. I mean, they don't want to be involved.
Yeah. And my buddy who was with me that night, he ended up getting a brick thrown through his windshield. And of course, people knew about that. So, and anyone who would help me, they would end up with a target on their back. These guys started waiting for me after classes. And, but I was lucky in a few things through all of this. My parents were very supportive, listened immediately. Of course, they were part of it because they got attacked. So again, that's different than most other bullying stories because my parents were attacked. Mm-hmm. But the school administrators were very helpful. The principal and vice principal worked with me to change my schedule. They gave me a different parking place. I parked with the teachers. I drove a different car to school because mine was such a target. So I would drive my work truck or work car. We had a bunch of different vehicles, so I would drive a different vehicle so they wouldn't know which was mine, and I would come in through a side entrance. So I wouldn't have to be around the general population as much as possible. They told the teachers what was going on, so the teachers would watch out for me. So they were very helpful. In fact, the principal and vice principal showed up at our final court hearing when I had called the parents in and had them arrested. They showed up on my behalf as well. So I hear a lot of stories of schools that ignore or don't want to do anything, mm-hmm. and that was not what happened with me at all. Every adult I spoke to was helpful.
Now, why do you suppose the majority of the parents that were involved that had children in the school just wanted their children away, yet the adults that were involved in one way or another with the school and or your case were helpful? I mean, where's the dividing line of fear, I guess, is the question.
Their kids being target.
Their kids being a target.
Who would be targets, the others didn't.
Okay.
So, yeah, the parents of the kids I went to school with, in fact, when I was, after we had them arrested, which, there's a bunch of stuff in between, but I went around, there were 4 other families I knew the kids had been seriously hurt, like the kid who had his leg broken and a few others. I remember who all of them are. One was a kid who had been beaten up numerous times in the gym shower. Again, just like you see in the movies, they would just attack him because he was kind of slow, and they would just beat the crap out of him. I went up to their doors with my dad and introduced myself and asked if they would be witnesses at our at the court trial, and every one of them slammed the door in my face. And this is going to help everybody in the school, but they wouldn't do anything. Oh, the buddy who was with me.
Yeah.
His mother, even though he was with me during the initial attack, his mother said, "I will never let my son show up in court." So I looked at her. I said, "That's all right. I'll subpoena him." And she looked at me and she goes, "All right, fine. I'll let him go." And I smiled. I said, "Thank you very much." And I walked out the door with my dad. I looked at my dad. I said, "She's lying. Let's subpoena him." And the subpoena showed up 2 days later. She hit the roof. Paul called me, and Paul told me at school. So she hit the roof and just screaming, "How dare they? I told you." And Paul looked at her and said, "Right after they left, you said you were lying." She goes, "Yes, but they didn't know that." So, I called her bluff on it. And Paul wanted to be there to support me. He was fine with it.
Well, good for you. I mean, I mean, you had to call her out, you know.
Oh yeah,
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 yeah.
And I got a kick out of doing that. But it was interesting. People were so afraid that they didn't want to be involved, and that was frustrating. I didn't particularly need them there, but I wanted to stack the deck as much as I could. Now, that said, so when we did the initial warning, it's in the book. I think it was within the week. I think it was the following Saturday. We had the official warning. 4 families, the 4 that showed up in our front yard. I didn't know who everyone else was when they attacked my car. I was worried about the people who attacked my family.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 ringleaders, Steve and Perry, had no fathers in the picture, just mothers, who were complete works themselves. And the other 2 had their mother and father with them. The judge warned them, told them, this is a serious situation. If your kids continue and attack, assault, seriously bully, whatever, anyone in the Simon family, all they have to do is call us and you're going to jail. So 2 of the families, the ones that had mother and father, they came up to us after. Well, one came up to us directly and said, "We're so sorry. We're taking his truck." It was the driver, Tim. "We're taking his truck away from him. We had no idea. This stops right now." And Tim came up and he said, "Dude, I was drinking that night. I just kind of got wrapped up. I'm sorry." I said, "Yeah, I was surprised to see you there. I thought we were friends." Tim I had known for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And never had a problem with him again. The other kid, whose both parents were there, they just walked out, and the father was smacking the kid in the back of the head, constantly going, "How dare you do this to me?" I never heard from him again. The 2 had only mothers there. Those mothers were glaring at me and at my family, making comments. One of the mothers called me a pussy in front of the judge.
Wow.
Let that pussy stand for his own. These boys can deal with their own thing. And that was the attitude in front of the judge. So that kind of told us that nothing was going to happen with the 2 ringleaders. But what was scary is the meeting I had with the judge right afterwards. So everyone leaves. We go back to the judge's chambers. And he said, "Look, these are serious charges, even though it's civil. These are serious charges. If you make a phone call, we will arrest them, no questions asked. But then we have to go to court. You have to make this worthwhile and make it so that you will win. So if they look at you sideways or call you a butthead, that's not enough." He said, "I don't want you to get hurt, but it has to be enough to stand up in court." And that's a fine line. That as a 16-year-old is frightening. So then we went home and we armed ourselves. We had guns behind every door. We had weapons and pipes behind every other door. We had the private security firm that was watching the house, who did have to drive off some people one time who came up. Didn't catch them, but there were people who'd stopped in the middle of the road to the house, and they chased them off, which we never found out who it was, although we have an idea. My mom had to wear wigs and dress up like someone else every time she left the house because she was afraid she would get recognized and attacked. And I tried to carry on with school. And that was tough. And I failed one of my advanced math classes because I couldn't think. I mean, they would stand outside the class and I would look through that little slit in the door and I would see a couple of the guys there. And that was it. I mean, there's no way to take a test in advanced math. I think it was advanced trig or no, it wasn't trig. I'd already gotten through that. I don't remember. It was some advanced math class, and I failed it.
What was
that was rough.
What was the line, Mark, as far as an offense to come back to the judge and say, okay, now's the time to pull the trigger? I mean, not literally, but to put them in that circumstance. Obviously it wasn't calling you a butthead, but
no. It's funny. There were a number of things I probably could have, but every time I was like, God, is this really bad enough? They broke into a girl's house one time. It was after a party. She had locked the door. They literally broke through the front door, and four of the guys jumped on me and attacked me. But I threw them off. I was able to get out, and I wasn't hurt. It scared the hell out of me. It was just me and a couple girls in this house, and two guys hold me down by my arms on a couch. One guy's behind me holding me by my shoulders, and Steve jumped up on top of the couch, starts trying to pound on me. And luckily I was able to throw them all off, and I didn't get hurt. And because I didn't get hurt, I told my parents, I said, I don't know. I don't know if that's enough. So there's always that question, right? But then there was that one. Okay, but that one day.
Let me stop you real quick. Isn't that breaking and entering an assault?
Yeah, but I was 16 and not thinking straight.
Okay, fair enough. Continue.
So
yeah.
So there was one afternoon. There was this really cute girl in one of my art classes who didn't know what was going on, and I got her to go out with me and hang out one afternoon, and I was so excited to actually leave the house and go do something and hang out with this really cute girl. And so I drove her home rather than her taking the bus. I drove her home, and I was in my car. She lived on the opposite side of the same subdivision that Steve, the ringleader, lived in. Mm. And he happened to drive, when we were hanging out in front of her house, he drove by with a couple guys in the car and saw me. And I saw him. So she and I are throwing a Frisbee out by my car. And I keep looking over my shoulder. God, are they going to come back? And I look, and I see 8 of them armed come around the corner with bats and chains and pipes. 8 guys coming after me. I just looked at her. I said, I got to go. Hopped in my car and just prayed. And I'm not religious, but I prayed that my car would start, because it's 63 and you never know.
Yeah.
Because I had to get out of there. And as my car, boom, 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 they break into a dead run. It starts up, and I go to pull my car into gear, and the first thing I do is I drop it into reverse.
Oh.
And I look in the rearview mirror, and I thought, I can end this right now.
Yeah, you could.
And then I pulled it down to drive and took off. That thought was there. And I had a nervous breakdown. I lost it. I drove around for hours. I didn't know where I was. I was somewhere in Houston. I just drove around crying, beating the ceiling of my car with my fist, beating my steering wheel. I lost my mind. There was an old buddy of mine who had moved away, lived miles and miles away. I finally made my way over to his house. Said, I need to use your phone, because of course there was no cell phones back then. Mm-hmm. And I called my parents. I said, 8 of them just attacked me. Steve and Perry were leading them. Make the call. I want Steve and Perry's parents arrested. And they said, where are you? I said, I'm at Johnny's. I'll be home at some point. And I called my buddy Jim. The only person who would still talk to me was Jim. I actually get emotional talking about Jim.
That's okay. Go ahead.
He's still my best friend to this day. I called him up. I said, Jim, I'm in trouble again. And he said, I'm getting my rifle. I'll be right there. No other thought. So he got to my house before I did. hours later, I finally drive up. My parents are waiting in the driveway for me. They're freaked out because they don't know where I am.
Yep.
So I drive up and I just walked past them. I couldn't talk. I just laid in a corner. And Jim and my parents made plans on how to protect the house, what corners to watch, where certain people might break in, and they set up sentry points between them. We had a pretty big house. There were a lot of different places people could come in. And they patrolled the house while I just shivered in the corner that night. And Jim said it was really unusual because normally I was always the take charge kind of guy. I ran crews. He worked for me for a while in construction. But I couldn't do anything. I couldn't say anything. I was out of it. But then we heard from Ogden the next morning, bright and early. The two mothers were picked up with conflict. They went after they were screaming and yelling and kicking and slapping everything to the cops. But the two mothers were picked up and thrown in jail that next morning. So everyone was on it.
Somehow it doesn't surprise me that the mothers were causing conflict. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a scary night.
I bet it was. Does that bring you any relief in the moment when you hear that the mothers are taken into custody at that point? Do you feel like this is finally that little bit of saving grace, or are you bracing yourself for more conflict?
Both. I mean, look, it was sweet justice. You hear that and there's no way a smile doesn't cross your face. Like, all right, bitch,
Yep.
This is great. It's not, they deserved it. We wanted whatever we could do to them. I was happy about. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, God, but now I have to keep going to school for the next month while we wait for the court trial. Luckily, they moved it pretty quickly. It was the trial was November 11th, 1980. Day that'll live in infamy in my mind.
Yeah.
And because it was civil, we didn't have our own attorneys. We were using the DA's office, and an assistant DA who didn't know anything about it showed up, and it was like, you're not the guy we've been talking to. But as I found over the years since, that DA offices are way overburdened. We didn't know that. Mm-hmm. So Officer Ogden went on his own to go get the principal and vice principal to speak on my behalf in court, and so we brought up four charges against each of the two mothers, but we only took two each into court because we wanted to leave two outstanding. We wanted to have just threats over their head, where at any moment I could just have them arrested again, because there were charges there, but I didn't have to be attacked again for me to cops again.
Okay.
There was a little bit of safety there, and we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but it was one of those things where the court trial was actually fascinating. I spent a lot of time in the book describing everything that happened, because it was a wild day, and it all ended. We did one at a time, and the first mother was up there. We found out she was actually dating her attorney. We found this out from the cop, and the attorney, and she had evidently been lying to him about what had happened, because he would ask questions that would get flipped on him, and he would just look at her like, what? and this is this is something I just thought was just beautiful. If I ever make a movie, this is a key element. He looked at her and said, "Are you proud of your son?" And she just looked at him, and tears are welling up in her eyes. And I looked at my dad. I said, "We just won this court case on that question." Because that's like asking someone if they've stopped beating their wife yet. And there's no good. Yes, I stopped beating her, which means you had been, or no, I haven't stopped beating her, which means you still are. Are you proud of your son? Well, she's either proud of him, which means that she condones his actions, which means she's guilty, or she's not proud of him, which means she can't control him, which means she's guilty. And she just sat there and started weeping. And that was it. And we won on that question. And they put her in handcuffs and let her away.
Wow.
And the other mother who had been watching this just pled no contest. She didn't want to go through it.
It seems like such an elementary question, are you proud of your son? But when you're under oath, it's such a backbreaker.
Well, there's no good way to answer that when you're in charge of controlling that son to not attack people.
Right. And in such a violent way, in such an extreme way.
Yeah. So, it was funny too, because just prior to that, again, this attorney thought he was so smart. The principal of my school, who was an old Marine, tough as nails, went up there and he couldn't answer a whole lot because they were juveniles,
mm-hmm.
and juvenile records are locked, and the attorney said, well, if these kids are really so bad, why haven't you done anything about it? Well, that pierced the protection. That question from the defense pierced it. And he said, well, I am. He said, we caught them. In fact, Officer Ogden caught them breaking into the school and burning their own records.
Oh.
And the attorney said, you can't speak about that. He goes, well, I can now. You pierced the protection. So that was able to come out in court, which we all knew it had happened, but we couldn't talk about it, and we were frustrated.
Right, yeah.
All of a sudden, we could talk about it.
It's fair game at that point, yeah.
Yeah. So here's what happened afterwards.
Okay.
So both mothers get led away. I have no idea what happened then afterwards. I don't know if they spent any time in jail. I don't know. I was 16 and I got my life back.
Right.
So, but watching them get let off, was that satisfying. So from that, I never saw the ringleaders again. They never showed back up at school. The principal was able to use my court case to get them kicked out of not only the school, but kicked out of the school district.
Wow.
So they were gone, and he had been trying for a while to get rid of them, but it was very difficult through the juvenile system. But I helped him. I then went back to those 4 families that slammed the door in my face. I went back to every one of them. And I said, I just won the court case and had the parents arrested. I want to show you how to do it too. And then they opened their doors for me, and I helped them. And then I went to 7 local businesses that had been having problems with these guys. Like there was a Church's Fried Chicken where some of these guys had kicked a customer through one of the plate glass windows. Another place where they had just disrupted and thrown things, broken stuff, attacked people or whatever. I went to all those places. And I said, here's a law that's brand new. I just won the first court cases with it. Here's how I did it. And some of them started pressing charges. And then I was deputized for my work on getting rid of the gang violence.
Wow.
But there's one thing for people who are listening that I'm going to back up just a little bit. When I'm in the middle of everything before the court trial.
Sure. Uh-huh.
My principal looked at me and, I was one of the good kids. And he even talked about that. He said, look, the reason I don't know Mark better is because there's no reason for him to have to come to my office. He usually knows the bad kids. He said, but I know enough about you. And he said, obviously, I looked at your grades. I talked to your teacher. Any school would be proud to have you. I'm happy to help transfer you to another school if that would make you feel safer. And my parents are there with me. And I looked at him, I said, why should I have to uproot my life? They're the bad kids. I'm not doing it.
That's very true. Why should you? Especially if you feel like you have a good life. Why should you have to uproot it?
Yeah. I said, screw them. They're going down, not me.
And
he said, okay.
That's the way it should be.
Yes, it should be.
Yeah.
I have friends whose kids, they move their kids to other schools because of bullying. And I said, but you're not helping your kid. All they know now is to run. And yeah, going through it is horrible. I came out stronger from it. And I wasn't going to try to fight these guys on their terms. I couldn't win. Against 30 people, even 8 people, I couldn't win. I wouldn't want to. I don't want to have to fight. But I knew they couldn't stand up to me on my terms. So I made them fight my way.
And not only that, Mark, but if you're running, maybe you're running into another situation where there's another bully.
There's always bullies, and you're absolutely right. Yeah.
You know, it's just, you may be running into more of the same. If you run into more of the same, what was the point? Other than you just spent more money to go deal with another situation and somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
You know, better to stand your ground and you know, it's a little bit of pain and heartache, but you know, through that is growth.
Yeah. Now, for any parents listening,
mm-hmm.
which we don't have to get into it here because, you know, I know we've been kind of going long, but.
Oh, no, we're fine. We're fine.
A lot of parents would say, I would want to, you know, I'd want to kill these kids. I detail in my book what my dad had planned that he did not admit to me for 20 years. He finally opened up what he was planning to do to those kids if the court trial didn't work. And I was aghast. I was like, my father, really?
Can you share it?
He had tracked them all,
okay,
knew their daily schedule, and knew where he would dispose of the body.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
He was not going to let my family suffer. But I go into details of the weapons that he had built in the workshop and where he hid them and what he had planned to do and how he tracked them. Yeah.
Boy, they really got his ire up. And I don't blame him, not one bit. Because
I've got twin boys. I don't know what I would do if their lives are being threatened by somebody.
I think it's
especially from someone, and I lived through this, and I know what my dad was planning to do. And it's not like I can't do anything. I'm a 2-time national champion in Taekwondo.
Mm-hmm.
I can take care of myself.
I think it's more than just assaulting the twin boys or assaulting you even, Mark. It's the fact that they breached your home. It's the fact that they went after his wife. It's the fact that it was just a complete desecration of everything in the home. Everything.
Yeah.
And I think you can't get a man more stirred up. And that's the only thing that's coming into my mind right now. You can't get a man more stirred up than when you've gone after his wife, his children, and his home. When you've done that, whatever you got coming is coming.
Yeah, and him.
Yeah, and him. Yeah,
he was physically assaulted too.
Right. Well, and I think that kind of takes a back seat for most men.
You're right.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Him too. But I think that's the last thing on the list. You know. Yeah.
It was. And it's a good thing that we hadn't talked to the judge prior to that first attack where they went after my dad. Because he asked the judge, Judge McElroy, he said, I was afraid his kid's underage, you know. And judge said, you can protect your family and yourself, no matter where you are, to any degree you need to. They were coming after you. He said, you could have splattered and crushed their skulls in the street. He goes, but look, if you're afraid of it, just drag the body up in your yard before you call us. That's what the judge told us. This is a no-nonsense judge. He was a true Texas man.
Yeah.
And Dad went, oh, I heard you. Okay. So the only time Dad ended up putting his hands on anybody, one guy ran me off the road, and I told Dad who it was, and Dad tracked down the family and met the father, who was a big rotund guy, at the door. And he smart-mouthed back to my dad, and Dad picked him up by the collar and lifted this big guy right off the ground.
Oh, wow.
And looked at him, he was a little shorter than my dad, but much wider. Dad picked him up, looked him in the eyes. He goes, If your son so much as swerves near my son again, I'm coming back. Put him down. The guy went white, slammed the door, and Dad just stood there at the front door listening and heard, "Boy, get in here." And then he heard smack.
Ooh.
And just listened to him beat his son.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I got to ask you, Mark.
Obviously, I never had a problem with that kid again.
No, I bet you didn't. So I got to ask you, Mark, I got to bring this around to modern day then. And again, I want to tell people marksimonbooks.com is where you're going to find the book Attacked, Bullied, Surviving Terror and Finding Justice. And by all means, we're not ending things yet, but I do want to bring it around to modern day.
Yeah.
Because we are in a society where you just can't, if you have a kid who's bullying other children, you can't close the door and, smack the mess out of them and call it a day and hope that they turn it around. Unfortunately, we're past that. And I do mean that. Unfortunately, we're past that. We're in a different time here. Corporal punishment doesn't necessarily work in our society anymore. We have to, the one thing that absolutely sickened me recently, I've got nephews and nieces that are school age, and there was this, I don't want to call it a TikTok challenge. It wasn't that, but there was the thing going around on TikTok about a National Violence Day at school, as recently as I believe it was last week, where there were kids in whole school districts talking about shutting down for a day because they were afraid that it was going to be a national thing where kids were going to take up arms and go to school and just shoot up schools. Is it to the point now where we've lost control, where we don't have the control on children anymore?
No, it's not. It's just whether or not certain parents decide they want to have control and exert control over their kids. So part of, and obviously the Crumbly case is relevant because, although this is criminal charges, the parents were arrested for involuntary manslaughter. Mm-hmm. The court case, the prosecutor, Karen McDonald, is going to have to prove the same thing I had to prove, which is that the parents had forewarning and didn't do anything about it. That's the crux of the case. To hold the parents responsible, you have to be able to prove that. Now, these days, granted, you can't just smack your kid around, although corporal punishment is still allowed in schools. A lot of people say it's not. Well, I actually read the rules when my kids went to school because there was a problem with a kid in their class. I read the rules, and the rules say you can, and the teachers can spank a kid. And this is in Florida, just a few years ago. So what people say versus the reality, I don't listen to what people say. I went to the law I went to the books. I actually read the rules of the school myself. Okay. And then I called the principal and the teachers together, and I explained the rules that they didn't even know to them. And I caused a stir because of that. So that said, there are things parents can do physically to potentially beat, for lack of a better word, their kids into not necessarily submission, but, give them a reason not to do bad things. You don't want nothing that's going to be permanent, but yeah, spanking is still allowed. But taking a kid to, if you take your kid to therapy, that's proof that you're doing something progressive, trying to do something to it. If you keep your kid from going out, if you can prove that you were not buying them weapons and leaving it with the kid, those are things that you can do to show that you are not responsible, that the kid acted on his own against what you were trying to do. In the case of the Crumbleys, they refused to bring their kid home when they were told what was going on. But 4 hours later, he shot up the school. Is that enough time? Will the court accept that as enough forewarning? Were there other warnings that the public has not heard about yet? That all has to come out. The prosecutor said there's stuff that they have that that public doesn't know, which I completely think is true.
Okay. Yeah.
But those things have to come out. But the mother laughed about the fact that the son got caught researching ammo.
Yep.
Okay, so that's acceptance. They gave him a gun, and they left it unlocked. It was a 9mm, which is a deadly weapon. They didn't search his backpack, and he had it with him while they were all talking to the administrators. But we're talking about hours here. Is that enough to win a court case? It all depends on all the other details that we don't know yet leading up to it. But that's from what I went through, that looks like that's what they're going to have to be able to prove, is that they had forewarning and did not do anything to try to curtail or change what he was planning on doing or what he was capable of doing.
So what do you say to someone who's on the other end of this now, that their children are being bullied and they're trying to get some sort of resolution out of, say, a school district or even out of the parents of a bully, and that those parents don't necessarily want to play ball?
Well, first of all, at least give people the opportunity to help you. Talk to the school administrators. Like I said, I was lucky that they were incredibly helpful for me. So I know those people are out there. Now, I have heard from a lot of other people who said at their schools, the administrators would not help at all. Well, that's where the schools then are at fault and have failed their students completely. Just like any school that has the rules of, what do they call it? Where anyone involved in a fight gets suspended.
Yeah.
No fault rules.
Yep.
Which is bullshit. That just means that they're not wanting to take responsibility. So that's telling the bullies, do whatever you want, because everyone is going to get blamed. So the victims probably won't say anything because they don't want to get in trouble as well as getting beat up. So that's free reign for the bullies. It's a bullshit thing that the schools set up. That needs to change immediately. So parents need to get involved with schools and try to get that change. They need to give an opportunity to administrators to help them. If they don't, go above the administrators and go to the school district. And if you're not getting anything there, go to the press. The press will always scare people into doing the right thing. Use the weapons we have these days. Use social media. And go and if that doesn't work, start talking to the law like I did. Find someone who will help you. And it's amazing what people will do when they think that they don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. And it's horrible to think you have to go that far, but sometimes you have to go that far. But you have to protect your kids.
Very true.
The kids can only do so much. I needed my parents' help. I was brazen, but I needed help. And they stood up and helped. And there was not a second of wavering. So
very true.
And like I said, the local cop helped me. He was fantastic, and the local Judge McElroy was incredibly helpful. We could call him if we had any questions directly, and he would help us out. So we were guided on how to do the right things, and thus we were able to win, and we shut it down.
Very true, and there are some very good law enforcement officers out there that can steer you on the right track and can help you out in a situation like that where maybe you're not getting a resolution from some school administration. School administrators do what they can to try and help you, but sometimes they get a little overwhelmed too. So, yeah, if you contact law enforcement, sometimes they can help there as well. And there are. In a lot of schools today, there is, unfortunately, it's a sad state of affairs to say this, but you do have law enforcement and school liaisons at younger and younger ages now. It used to be they only put a law enforcement liaison in high schools, but now I'm seeing that they're getting into younger and younger grades.
Well, and to that point, those cops that work extra hours at the schools know the bad students. They know them.
True.
So they're good people to talk to.
They are. They are.
Just like Officer Ogden was for me. He knew these guys. He also wanted to get rid of them.
True.
So, I built a team around me to help deal with what I needed.
Very
and
true.
It worked.
Very true. And you're absolutely right. And I think it says a lot, Mark, that you were not only had a lot more courage, I think, than most teenagers at that time, but you had a lot more self-esteem and self-confidence, I think, than a lot more teenagers would have had in that situation. I think, it took a lot for you before you had your nervous breakdown. I commend you on it. I think most teenagers would have absolutely melted after that first confrontation,
Look, none of it was easy.
No.
But for me, it was just, I'd had early success and a lot of responsibility very early on. So that helped me with how to get through things, because I dealt with things that most 14, 15, 16-year-olds had never even thought of. When I'm running a multi-million-dollar construction company with dozens and dozens of crew people, I would drive before school. I'd drive out to the job sites, get everyone started, and drive back to wrap them up at the end of the day. That is not a normal thing for someone who's 14 and 15 years old.
No.
So, but because of that, I could deal with things differently than other people my age. So it was my circumstances that gave me that ability, not just me. It was what my parents had kind of given me, in a sense, as far as responsibility. That gave me that kind of background to be able to stand up the way I did.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, we want to remind people, attacked, bullied, surviving terror, and finding justice, I'll get that right there, is available on your website, marksimonbooks.com. We have a link for it on the description of the show. I want to thank you very much, Mark, for joining us today, and again, commend you on coming through some extraordinary circumstances and setting that precedent for kids and parents everywhere.
Well, Tim, I appreciate your having me on. I hope a lot of people get some solace out of this. There is a way through whatever you're going through. Sometimes it just takes a little searching to get there. But, if my story can help anyone, that just makes me happy.
And again, thank you. That it's a remarkable story. And again, it gives people a solution that feel like they're powerless in a powerless situation. So I want to thank you once again for that. Folks, that'll do it for today's program. I want to remind everybody to go get the book Attacked by Mark Simon. Go to marksimonbooks.com. Be sure to pick up a copy of that book. The story is amazing. It's just amazing what Mark went through, and you can learn some valuable lessons from it. Want to remind people at this point, if you're not subscribed to Stitcher Premium, it's really simple. Just go to Stitcher.com, seek out the premium service, and sign up for just $5 a month. And you can get all the shows, not just True Crime Tuesday, but all the shows that Stitcher offers on the premium service for just $5 a month. You'll find not only True Crime Tuesday, but also Darkness Radio commercial free. And I'm telling you, there's hundreds of shows there that Stitcher offers. You're going to absolutely fall in love with Stitcher Premium. It's time to bid you adieu, and we will see you next week for another edition of True Crime Tuesday.